Hi, welcome back. This is Julie Usher. Today we're talking about 3D box construction. As you know, I love 3D cookies, and I like to distinguish between two types. One is a sandwich type construction, which we'll talk about in my Fabergé egg video, and also my place cards video. That's where the cookies get stacked on top of one another, sandwiched together, and then stood up. And here we're talking about fitting them together with mitered corners, as you see in this box. So two types of constructions, and this is a box construction. I love these 3D boxes because they make great favors, such as this. Fill them with goodies and give them to friends. And if you stack them up, and as in the case of this wedding cake box, you get a pretty showy sort of centerpiece effect. I would put that in the middle of a bridal shower table or a wedding table, and it would make a great sort of showstopper alternative to a wedding cake. Okay, simple box construction. What do you need? Typically, if the box is going to have a bottom, you need 5 pieces. And the sides can be any shape. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I cut this piece and also the window piece, and all of those templates you'll be able to find on my website. And you'll need a bottom. I typically cut the bottom about 1/4 inch shorter on both dimensions than the width of the piece that's going to fit up against it. So that allows some room for the sides to fit together, as you can see here. So let me talk a little bit about this particular shape. I do have a whole nother video that talks about cutting box shapes, how to keep the edges particularly straight, and particularly how to cut them when there are windows in them, because they pose a different challenge. Again, I encourage getting creative with your cutters. This is a standard rectangular cutter from the Atico set, but I wanted to create a fluted edge on top of it. So I cut out the rectangle first and then used my plaque cutter to cut off the top to create a swirly edge. And again, these shapes will be on my website, so you can just download them and trace them and either make templates out of them or turn them into cutters of your own. And then for this box one here, again, this was a custom shape. It's a little larger than usual. I didn't have a cutter, so I made a template out of it. And this particular template will be on my website. I wanted a window in it, so I simply took a standard round cutter and cut that out before baking to create the window. And a slightly larger round was used to create the backing piece for the window. So those are the basic components. You may have seen boxes, I'm sure you've seen boxes put together before. Sometimes they're just joined directly without doing anything to the corners. And I think that makes for a really clunky seam on the corner. I like to get the seams as tight as possible because they just look that much more refined. So I use a mitering technique, much as you would in woodworking, to kind of shave the corners down so they fit better. I like to do this after the cookies ice. So these cookies have been fully iced and decorated. You just want to handle them carefully. So here's an example of an unmitered corner. This is what it looks like. It's squared off when it comes out of the oven. This is an example of it mitered. I've actually shaved it down at a 45-degree angle, basically. So here the dough was at a 90-degree angle, shaved down at a 45-degree angle, and I've already mitered this particular cookie. And what that allows is the seams to come together really nice and tightly, so I don't have a big gargantuan seam to cover later. There still might be some. So I'm going to just show you how I did it on this one unmitered side. All my other sides I've mitered in advance. I start with a paring knife, and kind of like I pare it back gradually, as you would like peel an apple. Just be careful when you get to the ends. And I'm shaving down to the edge of the icing rather gradually. As we get closer, so I use the paring knife basically for my bigger shaving. And as I want to refine the fit, I'll take out a file or my microplaner and do a more gradual filing down. I've got a lot of cookie down here. And as I'm doing this, I'm fitting the pieces together side by side to make sure that they come together nicely. I haven't done that yet, but I'll show you that in a sec. So just filing. See, it's coming down to about a 45-degree angle. I've got a lot down here still. But now I'm getting pretty close to the icing. I want to be a little bit careful about using the paring knife, because if I hit the icing, I can't break it. Just want to be very careful about that. Here I take my microplaner and do finer shaves to get off the extra, the little bit that's, I don't know if you can see it, but I can certainly see it. There's a little extra there. I also have a file that works, a nail file works quite well for this task too. Okay, so there's my corner, nicely mitered. Bring my base back over. When you're assembling boxes, you want to assemble them on a piece of cardboard and typically work on bubble wrap. So if the face falls over, it falls onto something soft and doesn't break. As I said, I usually pare the base down so it's about 1/4 inch shorter than the width of the bottom, so that allows some room for the box pieces to join together. For putting the box together, I like to have some supports to prop up the sides. because they will lean as I go. I often use my dragé containers. They're pretty heavy and they'll prop up the entire side. The other thing I need is thick icing glue to put this together, and this is my thickest consistency of royal icing. I've tinted it to match my gingerbread color. If I were using a sugar cookie dough, I'd probably keep it white. Yeah, I just want the glue to be as invisible as possible. So I'm going to start by gluing up one side. I like to glue it at the bottom where it makes contact here. And I'm centering it in the space that isn't mitered, which I'm going to turn towards the camera so it's a little more visible. And I'm going to prop it here. Sometimes you need both hands. And I've got another piece that has already been pre-mitered that I'm going to, now I'm going to glue along the seam. Just hitting one seam is fine. Once I get this second piece up, I won't have to hold this first one up as much. Okay, I'm going to turn this back towards me so I can see a little bit better what I'm doing. Got a lot of glue poking out, and I want to get down a nice flat seam later, so I want to take out some of the extra right now and get that as tight fitting as possible. And I'm just going to prop from the back side. And I'm doing this on cardboard because it'll be easier to move it if I move the whole piece rather than pick up the box while it's still drying. I also want to make sure I'm gluing the bottom to the base. At this point, before I put on the last side, what I'm going to do is glue from the inside, just as reinforcement. I don't have too much on the seams themselves, as I'm putting them together, because I don't want it popping out the front. But I don't mind if a lot shows on the inside, because it's going to be covered with other stuff. And this will be the primary reinforcement. It helps to have a really full cone for this, because sometimes you have to reach inside some pretty deep boxes. I'm going up the side seams as well. And then what I'll do to make sure the icing's really in there is take a clean finger and just smear it, press it into the seam, like so. And then I'm ready for the final sides. I want to glue up both sides. So I'm placing glue. I try to keep the glue off the cardboard if I can. I got a little bit on there because that may make it harder to get the piece off the cardboard later if it dries onto it. But a little bit there shouldn't be a problem. Again, I use my parchment cone to dispense the glue on the sides of the cookie itself, just because I have a little more control as opposed to a spatula or something like that. So it's fitting pretty nicely. This one's sticking out a little bit, but I think I can conceal that with the seams. So before I set it to dry, I just want to get everything kind of squared off as nicely as possible. And I'm going to rotate it one more time. I'm rotating the whole board. It's easier than rotating the box to make sure that the seams look good from all directions. And I'm also going to apply a little more glue at the top and the back to the panel that I just added, just as I did before I put it on. And this acts as reinforcement. Don't worry if it gets everywhere. You just want to make sure this stays together. A little press of the finger to smear it in. And then I'll set that aside to dry and come back and use a star tip to fill in those seams. While it's drying, I'm going to put together a smaller box, even smaller, show you how I did that again, without a bottom, which is a little bit easier. And this particular piece is going to fill out my wedding cake project in the next video. So I'm just going to set this aside to dry. We'll come back and fill in the seams and finish this box after the small one. Okay, I'm back. I cleaned up a little bit. I'm going to show you how I put together the top tier of the wedding cake box. It's a slightly different construction because it doesn't have a bottom. So these are about 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch squares, a standard Atico cutter, and I've mitered the corners already. You can see that. Without the bottom, I don't have to worry so much about paring down that bottom and fitting them together. It's going to fit together a lot more neatly and quickly, but it's still the same basic technique. And this is a small one, so I don't really even need to prop it. I don't need a bottom on that wedding cake box. You'll see why in that video. I'm stacking it on other things, so things aren't going to fall out of the bottom. I guess I generally find it easier to apply the icing to the cookie itself as opposed to the box, just because I have more control about where it lands and less is likely to squeeze out the sides. I will make sure everything is squared off and fitting as tightly together as possible before I set it aside to dry, because once it dries, you can't really manipulate the shape anymore. So the seams are pretty tight. They still will require some filling to conceal that brown, but not nearly as much as if you hadn't mitered the corners. I'm going to return to the original box now and show you how I complete the seams. Hi, I'm back. This box is now stable enough that I can do the borders. I didn't let it dry altogether too long, maybe 5-10 minutes, because I'm working with a thick icing glue and it sets pretty quickly. Now there's still some seams, of course, even though I've mitered, and I want to cover those up with an icing of the same color so that when I pipe my star border down, I won't see any of that gingerbread poking through. So since I've got a two-tone color on the box, I'm going to be filling in with white and a blue along the seam, and then I'll put down a decorative border. I'm not leaving it like this because then it's going to be harder to get my star border down flat on it. So I do like to wipe it flat. Just make sure I'm covering most of the gingerbread. A little bit showing there is fine, but it's just so that I'm concealing that dark area, because that will show later. I've got some blue that I've roughly matched the bottom color to. Actually, it's probably a little bit darker, but that'll do. And this seam's pretty deep here, so I am pushing into the seam a bit. Flattening it. I'll repeat this all the way around. Okay. And now I'm ready to put down the star border. And my box is somewhat stuck to the cardboard, so I'm just loosening it with a paring knife, because when I put this border down, I like to have the box as close to the edge as possible. So I've got some hand clearance. So it's sitting at the edge of my container. Just I'm kind of doing a trailing star or shell border. Applying a little bit of pressure, pulling down, pressure, pulling down, pressure, pulling down. And I'm going to do all the white, and then I'm going to come back in and fill in with black down at the bottom. This is a little hard to do without steadying your hand. You'll notice I've got two hands on the bags. My hands are shaking a bit, and I'm trying to steady my elbow of my right hand on my leg. I tend to use a small star tip. I think I'm working with a 27, just because it closes more of that gap. Okay, and then I'm going to change, same tip, just I've got black icing. And again, note on the icing, when you're working with metal tips and you want a textured effect, as I do here, the icing needs to be very thick. It's very close to my glue consistency. This is why it's important to be very close to the edge to get that last bit at the bottom on. Okay, one last seam to do. As you're moving the box, be careful not to hit the seams you've just piped, because they'll be wet and they'll smudge. In black, once it smudges, it's impossible to get off. You know, I'm going to put my glasses on. I realized I wasn't working with them. I think I will probably get neater results if I do. So one last seam to go down, and then this box is essentially complete. I think what I'm going to do is one last touch is actually, because the black doesn't go quite to the bottom, is actually stick a bead down at the bottom instead. The icing should be dry enough, wet enough still, that I can get it in without applying more icing. But if you wait too long, you might have to apply a little bit more. I think that just finishes it off. Before filling this with goodies, I would let this dry easily like an hour or 2 hours. Make sure it's pretty intact. And then I always slide it onto another plate before I fill it, because there is the potential of the bottom falling out with a lot of weight in it. So slide it with an offset spatula, and always support it from underneath. You can put feet on box as well, cut out little rounds and stick them on, or put windows in them. I'm going to be talking about how to put windows in the box similar to this one here in my next quick video. Till then, live sweetly.